Hi, you're listening to Delusional Optimism with Dr. B,
where we explore human resiliency
and learn how people thrive even after adversity.
We break down the complexities of the human brain so concepts are simple and relatable.
It's fun and empowering to understand how your earliest experiences
influence your relationships today.
What makes you tick?
Dr. B is a speaker, trainer, and consultant who understands emotions and human development from the inside out.
Let's dive into today's episode.
Here's Dr. B.
Well, hello again. This is Seth Creekmore. Welcome to Delusional Optimism. And this week we have something quite special. So many of you may or may not know, I have another podcast that I co-host with two other phenomenal humans called Fathoms, an Enneagram Podcast. We talk about self-development, we talk about personality things, lots of random stuff. It's something that I'm actually quite proud of and I thoroughly enjoy doing. So feel free to check that out when you have a chance. What's really special about this particular episode is for Fathoms this season, we decided on a theme of story. And you'll hear a little bit more about that as we get into the episode. But we figured who better to have on than Dr. B. For those of you who know her, she's such a storyteller. And really, her life is about knowing stories and understanding stories and how they affect us and how to rewrite them. And she just, as you know, drops so many wisdom bombs that we just were in awe. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy. Well, welcome everyone to Fathoms. Drew, if you could only see Drew right now, he went all emo. If you just
fits my mood right now.
You took his plaid shirt away, then
it does kind of mess it up. But.
And you may hear Abram is perhaps not in the most secluded, isolated sound area.
I'm in the one and only Crema Coffee in Nashville, Tennessee. If you come ever visit, you want to check this place out.
And he's not in a studio because those are really hard to find in Nashville.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So this gives you a bit of a glimpse into the lives of how efficient and put together we are as Fathoms, the podcast. Super professional, and we always record in the pristine environments. So this week we have one of my dear friends, Dr. B, Dr. Kristen Beasley.
Dr. B.
Yes, she's a clinical psychologist specializing in early childhood development. And the great thing about this is she and I actually have a podcast as well. It's been in the works for a while, and it's a fun podcast that I think really delivers some phenomenal value when it comes to parenthood, how to raise children, how to deal with trauma. This past season was about generational differences. Just a really wonderful human and brilliant as all get out. So real quick, gents, what if you can think back to that interview, what is one thing that maybe stood out for you?
Oh, I'd say her wisdom regarding our stories, especially as children, and all of the insights regarding resilience. I think there's a lot of hand-wringing right now over the youth of today and their lack of resilience. And I think Dr. B gives some real, just pure gold in terms of, okay, we can have that narrative, but there's also so much good that can be done in this life. Yeah, so she's brilliant. Yep.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I also think for me, her expertise on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, kind of the percentage of how many of those you have, you kind of inform what your kind of adulthood will look like. But also just the fact that she talked about the hope that we still have, even though maybe our childhood had lots of ACEs. What we live in a world that brain science tells us new things about what we're capable of, which is really hopeful and exciting. So
absolutely, yeah. So I hope you all enjoy this episode. I think it's definitely one of the ones that I was most excited about having for this season. An actual psychologist talking about things. She actually doesn't know. She doesn't know a bunch about the Enneagram, but as you'll see as you listen, it starts tying in very quickly to the Enneagram and the stuff that we're working on. So hope you enjoy, and make sure to go check out her Instagram and the podcast Delusional Optimism, which I'm a co-host on as well. So without further ado, here's Dr. B. Delusional Optimism to Fathoms.
I used the word fathom in a sentence the other day, though, because I learned it from you guys. I was like, it was just, I can't even remember how I used it, but I was like, use it carefully. Fathoms the depth of something. Yes. I was like, that is the coolest word ever.
That warms my heart.
Educating America.
I loved
1%
it.
at a time.
Yeah.
So we are here with Dr. B, aka Kristen Beasley. Do your friends call you Dr. B, or like what is?
Well, I have a lot of names, so you can call me Kristen. It's fine. Lots of people call me Kristen. Most people call me a version of B or BB because I'm a grandparent, and so my granddaughter and all children almost refer to me as BB.
Aww.
Because of that.
Oh, that's sweet.
A lot of my adult friends who work with me, instead of saying Dr. B, they'll just say, hey, B, BB, they just call me B. Or sometimes people call me KB, or they call me Kristen. So, it just, and then,
my goodness.
it was a lot. I answer to a lot of things. I never answer to Christy or Chris.
That just doesn't feel right at all.
So Christy, Christine. Now, my name isn't even Christine, but people say that sometimes. I'm like, whoa, that is not my name. But
you have all
Christy
these other options.
Chris.
Just pick one that's
you have all these other options. Just call me BB. If in doubt, call me BB. So
yes, awesome. So Dr. B and I, we do another podcast called Delusional Optimism, which you all should check out as well. So Dr. B, in the time that I've known you, as soon as I started editing your podcast, that's how this relationship started. Yeah. As soon as I started hearing your ideas, how you were approaching things from science and psychology and all this other things, it was like the only podcast that I enjoyed editing. Because it's right up our alley.
And he edits our podcast.
As soon as I heard
Well, that's sweet. I love that.
And as soon as I heard you talking, I'm like, oh, we gotta have her on Fathoms.
Thank you.
And that was like, what?
Yeah.
I don't know. We've been working together for like a year.
Yeah, it's been over a year. Yeah.
Wow.
We're starting our season 2. So
the work that you do, you're self-employed.
I am self-employed.
So how do you make the monies come into the bank thing?
Wow. Okay, that's a big question. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, that's true.
What my goal, passion, purpose is to build the psychoeducational awareness, vocabulary, knowledge base of all people because we don't have enough professionally trained mental health providers to serve everybody on an individual level. And I believe that this is just basic educational information that people can use and learn from and then use with each other to heal and grow and transform and educate and parent and partner. So I decided to create Leave a Life Print Academy, where people can go to access educational classes around all kinds of different areas related to psychology, neurobiology, and parenting, and use that as a way to understand mental health in a very, I'm not going to say generic way because it is very depthy. It's deep psychology, but it's also accessible and it's manageable and meaningful. And we take complicated concepts and put them in manageable, easy to understand strategies for daily life, I guess.
Yeah, Dr. B, I will say that I have listened to a handful of your episodes on the podcast, and from a personal experience, yes, you're talking about really in-depth, seemingly super complex topics, but making them incredibly accessible for the layperson. I'm super into psychology and all these different things that you're addressing as well. But what I've heard from you is you're just really distilling down these massive things that you could probably read about your whole life, but making sense of it really well. And I really appreciate that. I've experienced that too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Because that is my goal is, and Seth hears me say this all the time. You know, I love littles. I call them littles, but I want littles to be able to understand their emotional landscape inside themselves and to be able to navigate that. And when they need help, to be able to ask somebody who also can navigate their emotional landscape. That's my dream for the world, and it's probably inspired by my precious granddaughter, but lots of littles I've had in my life where this has been my professional work for a long time. So that is my goal, that I try to make conversations about hard things not feel scary or hard. So thank you for saying that, though, because it makes me feel good that I'm doing it in some way.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons we wanted to have you on is you are a clinical psychologist specializing in early childhood development. Is that correct? And so with our theme this season being stories, and like the three parts of those stories of knowing and accepting your story, knowing what stories to drop, and knowing the stories of others. So in early childhood development, this is the beginning of your stories. This is laying the groundwork, the highways, as you like to call it. This is a very large question that I maybe just try to distill it down like you do. How are our stories built? Like just very basic level.
So our stories begin with really prenatally, but we don't need to go there. Let's just say when you are born and your brain is developing, in the first 3 years of life, 80% of those roadways are developed. None of the cars are on them necessarily yet. Very few of them anyway. So that's the pathway for our stories. Those are the roadways for our stories. So that helps us to say, okay, I'm going to write from right to left. I'm going to do, there all the rules are sort of set in place, the infrastructure. So that's the first 3 years of life. So right off the bat, I want everybody to ping. This is super important. Pay attention. First 3 years of life, you need to be on it. You need to invest your time and money and energy and love and heart in that period of time. But that's just the beginning. You don't get to stop there. But that's the beginning. And that's where then all the experiences we have become our stories on those pathways. So they become the chapters of our books, really.
That's great. Along those lines, you are also somewhat of an expert on ACEs. Can you give us a quick overview of what are ACEs and how do those play into our stories and affect us?
So there's been a lot of research done over the past 3 decades, really, around how trauma or adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, that's the acronym, impact a person's mental health and physical health across the lifespan. So we didn't really know that before. We didn't know that you could potentially become diabetic because you have trauma in your childhood or be more at risk of asthma or other physical health things that we thought, oh, this is separate. Physical health is over here, mental health is over here. Now we know that adverse childhood experiences, trauma before the age of 18, actually correlate to mental and physical health consequences from depression, anxiety, suicide, early death up to 20 years. So some of those, the research is based on a man named Vincent Felitti, Dr. Felitti's work. And there are 10 ACEs that he used in his original study, and I'll just rattle them off. And if you want to know more about ACEs, just Google adverse childhood experiences, because we
go listen to the podcast Delusional
or just go listen to the podcast Delusional Optimism.
Yeah.
But there are 5 that live in the house of the personal, and then there are 5 that live in the house of the family and family dysfunction. So we have physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, and emotional neglect. Then, and the difference between emotional abuse and emotional neglect is I don't even see you. You don't exist. You're in front of me, but you're irrelevant to the universe, which writes the story, I am unworthy. I'm worthless. Emotional abuse is you are a terrible, horrible person. You're never going to amount to anything. It's an active way of saying you're bad, and and that writes that story. And sometimes it's both.
Yeah.
So that's the personal. Now we go to the family dysfunction that are the other chapters. A parent or caregiver with struggles with a mental illness, a parent or caregiver who struggles with addiction, a parent or caregiver who's been incarcerated, imprisoned, a child witnessing their mother being treated violently, so domestic violence. The last one is the loss or abandonment of a parent or caregiver, so through death, divorce, or just them leaving. Those are other chapters that we can write into our story as a child. So adverse childhood experiences happen before you're 18, and those are only 10. And I would, and I think most people in this community would agree that there's so many things that could fall under the ACEs heading, but those are the ones we just kind of, the big categories.
So Dr. B, if these ACEs occur, before the age of 18, and you already mentioned just a few kind of fascinating examples of what the implications or consequences could be. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about what happens in adulthood potentially when ACEs occur.
When ACEs occur in adulthood, or what?
No, when they occur in children, what are those kind of ramifications?
What do they look like in adulthood?
Consequences.
Okay, so ACEs, when ACEs occur, when an adverse experience happens, which I will just generally say trauma, then it's going to have an impact on the child or an adult or an adolescent, because it's a trauma. It wouldn't be a trauma if it didn't have a consequence. So it can lead to depression, anxiety. In adulthood, it can lead to, there are higher rates of suicide for people with high ACE scores or, high ACE experiences. But I also want to plug the positive experiences and positive relationships, because just because people have high trauma or a high number of ACEs, those ACEs can be mediated by as little as one loving, attuned relationship where somebody is there to support somebody through that trauma. And that's really where my work is. I did my dissertation on resiliency, which is what is the outcome of that person being the support system or creating an environment where we build resilience so people can overcome and thrive from adversity.
This is just a more specific question going back to the personal side of ACEs. I'm just curious, more of the missing versus the obvious, like the neglect versus the obvious abuse. Both of them are abuse, right? But I'm curious, is it, and I'm maybe revealing some personal things here.
That's okay.
With this question, but is it harder to uncover or name what is neglectful rather than more obvious in childhood as an adult? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think if I'm hearing what you're saying, is that obviously physical abuse is more visual, like we can see it, right? And we respond to it much more quickly and much more dramatically than we respond to neglect, because neglect is hard to see, And number two, we really don't believe that neglect has as powerful an impact on a child than physical abuse does.
Right.
The reality is the exact opposite. Neglect actually has much more powerful consequences, especially left untreated and unaddressed, than physical abuse. Because if you think about it, if I come in front of you with a black eye, you're going to say to me, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay? Oh my gosh, that looks like it really hurt. And what can I do for you?" So you get, when children who are physically abused and it's identified, they're often validated in their reality that it's happening. When there's neglect, especially if kids don't even have an experience of what neglect, the opposite of neglect, a non-neglectful space looks like, or relationship, then this is just the norm. It's very difficult to first identify and recognize it as a child, as even a problem, but rarely did any adults come in and validate or acknowledge that as a problem either. So the consequences of neglect are actually quite a bit more significant than the consequences of physical abuse, because we see the results, and we can actually, and in a lot of cases, child protective services will not show up unless there are physical marks on a child. So that leaves kids really in a very, very, if you don't have food, shelter, water, heat, or the ability to cool yourself down, or take care of yourself, or especially as a baby, then, you're at risk of dying, just like you would be in front of a very violent caregiver.
Right. That makes sense. And is it what's called the infant strange experiment, where you watch the baby and like the mother is completely neglectful in her entombment? Still face. Yes.
Still face. Yes. Yeah. That, do you want me I can explain that very quickly.
Be awesome.
Yeah, please do.
So the still face experiment actually is one of my favorite to use as a teaching tool, because what happens is babies are born and they are completely helpless. If we just birth a baby, set them aside, leave them alone, pretty much they're going to die, like without care. They need care. So the first thing that a baby does after birth is, boom, make eye contact with a caregiver in the room, because what happens is there's a flood of neurochemicals, particularly interestingly towards dads, fathers, because all of a sudden these massive protective hormones and neurochemicals are flooded into the brain that say, I need to protect this little thing. And they fall in love. And mothers have already fallen in love because they've been carrying this thing in their body for 10 months. So we do this. So this is now the dad's opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, now I'm completely hooked. And anybody who is a parent, especially dads that I've talked to, are like, oh yeah, like you could just feel the tension if you're going to mess with their baby. So the still face, so babies are hypersensitive to micro emotions. So we're like, oh, hey, I'm smiling. I'm happy. You're not getting. But as soon as I do this on the screen.
Yeah.
Now, how uncomfortable is that for everybody? Like, I tried to hold it just a little extra, just so you guys would get
to make a point,
to get uncomfortable. It's like, oh my God,
I need a break. Actually,
where did she go? Like, what the hell? I've never seen her act like that. The baby is like, exactly, emotionally, they're doing the emotional without the verbal words of what the hell. They're like, what happened? Where did my person go? I know that if I smile, they're going to smile back, because mirror neurons, You know, it's almost difficult. Like if I smile at you, you can hardly not smile back at some level. So when you do this, what happens with the baby is they first question, like, what's going on? Something is wrong here. Babies are way smarter than we give them credit for. And then when the parent holds it longer, it gets more uncomfortable. And then babies will try whatever tricks they have. And all babies have their own tricks that they use. You know, they'll point at something or whatever. They'll jump and smile, or they try their tricks. And then if the parent stays flat-faced, emotionless, then they begin to dysregulate. They begin to just fall apart emotionally. Just like I could have, in a weird way, you started to feel that, like what that could feel like.
Sure.
If somebody you really love and care about and need on a different level, I mean, we're all old enough to just walk away. But when somebody does that to you, shuts you out emotionally, we all feel that, oh my gosh, like, that feels terrible. And you can feel your body activating into the anxiety, the fear, the scare. And that's our polyvagal system there's a danger here. Something's wrong. Like my person is not doing what they're supposed to do. And the normal things I do are not working. I need help. And that was such important research in infant research, but it's also important research just in the adult world, because we also do not like that. Nobody likes to have that emotional. We rely so much on people's expressions, body language, micro emotions in order to survive. People get all hung up on the words, but really the words mean nothing without the emotion behind them.
Yeah.
You know, I think 10% is like the words, and 90% is all the other stuff.
You mentioned babies have tricks, and I imagine there's probably some correlation to Enneatype. That's the beginning of our strategies coming online of how do I get the thing that I want? And that's, not to make a false correlation there, but that just does sound very familiar and a probabilistic way of where that begins.
Yeah. Well, that does beg the question. You know, we are a podcast that most of the time is about the Enneagram and this kind of realm of personality. So I'm curious then, where does personality come into play? And from your expertise, how does personality develop? Because there's all these really simple understandings in the Enneagram world about personality development. And so it'd be nice to have an expert in early childhood development tell us how personality forms, since that's a lot of the world that we live in. Yeah.
I think that personality, for one, it's not just one easy answer, one simple thing. So we start with genetics, you know. We got genetics. They play a role. There's no denying it. That, you know, who you become is influenced not only by your genetic, you know, parents, but also their parents and their ancestors before them. And we do know now that trauma is carried forward epigenetically through our genes. So from one generation to another, which contributes, which is why a child maybe seems so much like their great grandpa and you're like, what? Or maybe run down a similar behavioral path. A second thing, so we got genetics, then we have temperament, and temperament comes online also at birth. Like it's online at birth. Okay. So temperament is sort of in three simple categories: fearful or shy, cautious, slow to warm, flexible, pretty easy. Like I'm not going to just run into your arms, but I'm not, you know, I'm pretty flexible in terms of connecting and engaging with somebody as long as I feel safe. And then there's the feisty, and this kid often gets, you know, labeled as the hyper one or the, you know, difficult child. Mm-hmm. And this happens right at the beginning. We often don't call them difficult until they're 5, or 3, but they're the kiddo who doesn't sleep on a regular schedule, doesn't eat on a regular schedule, or easy foods, or they have really high, intense reactions to things or no reaction to it. And so that's important in terms of personality development because that plays into it. That's your personality. Now let's add a parent. Let's add a parent who has one temperament with a child who has a different temperament. And if parents aren't aware of temperament matching, they can just be constantly bombarding. I have this experience with my youngest son, who is very slow to warm. He's very, he's an introvert. And I'm an extrovert, and I'm, moving all, like, change all the time. Blah, 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 blah. And so it's important for me to match my temperament to him in order to parent him the best I can. Now, I've told him this as an adult now. He's an adult, and I'm like, I'm so sorry I didn't do this with you as much, because I probably just rattled his cage a lot as a little guy, because I was always, come on, let's go do this. Come on, let's go do that. And he's like, overwhelmed, overstimulated by my energy. And so that plays into personality. And then experiences. And this is where I think with you guys, the stories, the stories come in. We have experiences with people, places, things, and then we write the stories based on our genetics, based on our temperament, based on our experience. Because if your temperament is slow to warm and somebody else's temperament is feisty, you can have the same experience and you're going to write a different story. That was crazy. That was overwhelming. I hated that. I don't want to do that ever again. Oh my gosh, that was so fun. Let's do it. Let's do it again.
Right. Yeah, I'm a twin. And we had the same experience growing up, but interpreted it very differently. Right.
Absolutely. And when people say that, I would always question, did you really have the same experience? Because really, siblings in the same house and twins, even, you shared the same womb, but even in the same household, different people, parents, can treat children very differently.
Right.
Based on, even your sibling, are you identical?
No.
You're fraternal. Okay, so even more so that birth order still plays a role. So birth order for the children. So one's an oldest and one's a youngest, unless there's another child. So those things influence. But parents love to say, I treat my children all the same. Bullshit. I'm going to call bullshit. No, you don't.
So true.
No, you don't. You know what? You just don't. And I'm a parent of 3 children, and they are. There is no way. I gave my goal, and I'm a better parent today than I was then. But they all needed very different things at different times. And that's what we do as parents, is that we provide our children ideally with what they need at the time they need it, whether their sibling needs it or not.
Right.
So actually what I think I hear you saying is it's not a good thing that we would parent our kids exactly the same. We actually want to be attuned to the specifics of what each kid needs.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. I have 3 teenagers, and I've had this conversation with them. So I have 5 kids total, but 3 are teens. And
wow.
And I had to tell one of my kids, you don't want me to parent you exactly the same.
No, you don't.
Because that actually wouldn't be fair. Because often it comes up as an issue of justice or fairness, right?
Yes.
But that's really hard to get through to kids when, because their perception doesn't always match the reality, right?
Yeah. And that's developmental too. They're not all of their, how old's your oldest teen?
Oldest is 16. Yeah.
Okay. So 16 at max. They're still 10 years, like 8 to 10 years away from their brain being fully developed.
Right.
And really, that's like 13 to 16 is actually kind of a repeat of development. It's like a refining development of the brain from toddlerhood.
Yeah.
Okay, so me, mine, I. That's what early teens are refining from the first time they did it in toddlerhood.
Interesting.
It's because then when they get into adulthood, now they've had 2 phases of toddlerhood. So sometimes you get to put yourself first, but you also sometimes have to put other people first.
Interesting. I like that.
Yeah. And my kids love it when I remind them that their brains aren't fully formed or developed yet.
I'm sure.
They really appreciate it when I make sure to remind them about that.
You're still adding cars. Like the infrastructure's there, but you're still adding cars, guys. There's like still cars to be added.
Yeah, that's a good image. Yeah. So then I guess maybe that does bring up a question in terms of the stories that kids kind of live, right? And their personality and their temperament. How do we as parents or people who just are in relationship with children, whether, Creek's an uncle, for instance, right? And cares very deeply about that role. I mean, what advice would you give us for helping, to not do so much harm and to love children well, knowing that, they are living these stories, their personality and their temperament plays a big role. Do you have any advice?
Tons of it, probably too much, but
other than listening to your podcast, what would be like maybe 1 or 2 things that would be helpful for us to know?
Okay, so this is the goal, is to really get adults in tune with children and committed to the process of growing children from the beginning through the stages so that we don't have to figure this stuff out as adults that happened to us as children. That we really can clean, things are still going to happen, but they're the normal things. Or if something bad does happen, that we know that this is where we intervene with, loving, caring adults are always available and around. I think that generationally, which is something Seth and I talk about, or Creek and I talk about on Delusional Optimism, is that millennials and beyond are raising children to talk more about their feelings and are invested in having harder conversations with younger children and bringing them into the fold in a way that is very important, where we would never have talked to children about, sex when they were 5, or let's make it even harder. How about sexual abuse with a 5-year-old? In my generation, like nobody ever talked to me about any of that when I was 5. I mean, that's just like unheard of. Yeah. And yet I have a book on my shelf right here, a kid's book about sexual abuse. And it's a book publishing company where they actually write books for adults to read with children, not to children, but with children. In order to have difficult conversations in age-appropriate ways, because we aren't necessarily taught how to have a conversation about, there's one on being non-binary. There's one on depression. There's one on belonging or bullying. So all these concepts that are very important that kids are going to know about, whether we talk to them about it or not. Now we're bringing everybody into the fold and having shared conversations in appropriate ways. Kids can ask questions. I listen to my granddaughter, and Seth, I know we've talked about this with your niece, right? That they're just brilliant. I mean, they know so much stuff. My granddaughter says to me all the time, like, "Baby, some snakes are egg-bearing and other snakes have live births." And I'm like, okay, I'm 54. I had no idea that snakes, some of them laid eggs and some of them had live births. And, she just has so much information about so many things because it's accessible to her in ways that are different. But on an emotional level, she needs me to still do all the things that a little still needs. Like she still likes to cuddle and read books and,
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Shared conversations in appropriate ways.
Shared conversations in appropriate ways.
That's good.
I have one more.
Yeah.
I'll tell it to you that.
Please.
And this is something that I've learned as a grandparent. This is something that became really important to me when I knew I was going to become a grandparent. That I wanted my grandchild, and she just happens to be a girl, my granddaughter, to know me and for me to be able to share insights, wisdom, stories with her whole life. So one of the things that I did, and I don't know like how this actually came to me, but I took my daughter when she was pregnant, the last 3 weeks of her pregnancy, on a trip, just her and I, and our baby and her baby. And I took a horseshoe and I have a spot that I go to at the beach in California where it's where I spread my dad's ashes. And it's a very meaningful place for me. So at that spot, I buried this horseshoe in a spot on the beach with a map of where it is so she could treasure hunt for it someday. And I made a book about it. And I made this little, you can get books for $5, on Photo Free or whatever it's called. And I made her a book about this trip her mom and I took before she was born, and this horseshoe, and that she has treasure at the beach for her to find someday. And then there's other parts in that book that are just BB things about how excited I am. But just this past month, I was back down there, and she knows about her treasure, and she's never gotten to go there yet. But I was there, and she couldn't go with me, and I took more treasure, and I created a new treasure at same spot, a little bit different location from the horseshoe, but I buried different things that are meaningful to me around my dad. And now I made her a new book, second treasure book, that talks about some of the things that are important to me related to my dad, her great grandpa, who she never will meet, but these are stories and messages that I want her to remember. But if I leave them to her at 6, she probably won't remember them as clearly as having something concrete from me when it's very intense for me.
Okay.
It's a time for me to share when I'm actually having the emotional connected experience, and to share that story with her for her to hold on to forever in a physical way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
And parents can do it. Parents can do it with their kids. I didn't know to do that as a parent. Now I want parents to do that.
Yeah.
But as I do it as a grandparent. I also think parents are so busy parenting that we often don't have time as parents to do all those things that are different when you're a grandparent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, I'm curious, in light of our season's theme this year of story, building one, how one is built, and also when learning to let go of certain narratives that maybe worked for us at one point in time, but now are the exact ones that are hindering us. I'm curious. I've in the last year I've stumbled across this terminology of a coherent narrative, and I'm sure you know what that is. And I wonder if you could speak to us about, because it could sound like it's inevitable. We are going to be damaged, and that's the rest of our life. But what's the hopeful thing about how we can because neuroscience is telling us we are malleable, right? What does it look like to build a coherent narrative?
Beautiful. That's such a great question, Abram. And so important as we are learning and exploring neuroscience and the brain and the plasticity across the lifespan. So even though, we're fully developed at 24 to 6, whatever, around there, we still can change our brain until we die. That's our brain wires where our brain fires. And as long as our brain is firing, we are alive. So that's important to remember, that we are continuously able to change. We're more impacted by that firing at certain stages of life, Bigger things are happening in infancy and adolescence, and then women at 40. There's another reorganization of the brain, and there is a version of that too if for men. But if you think about menopause and the reorganization of the brain and the neurochemicals and the hormones in the body depleting and really changing the identity perspective, and so that's a whole other episode. But in terms of changing the narrative and the coherent narrative in order to heal is really what we're talking about. Is taking those stories that were built as children or young people, or even things that we've perpetuated in our adult lives. I'm not good enough to do that. I'm not good enough. I can't do that. I'm not worthy of blah, blah, blah. All the stories that we have in our heads that make up who we are and what we tell ourselves they become self-fulfilling prophecies in a way. We sabotage, we end up sabotaging our own successes, wins, happy moments, because these negative recordings are in our brains and really throughout our body, right? So what we can do when this is what coherent narrative means is to take, and I literally really in a lot of ways just did this again for myself, because we have to do this over and over and over again in our lives to fine tune that new narrative that makes sense, and to let go of parts that they're just not serving us anymore. And because I work in trauma, I literally just did a 3-day intensive trauma sort of, I call it the tune-up, with my own psychologist out of town. And it's intense. I did art, I did music, I did walking, I did meditating, I did hypnosis, I did therapy. So a lot of things that went into that, but part of the process is going through my narrative and then refining it. It's like writing an essay that you have a draft of, and then you say, okay, this is part of the draft that I can let go now, or I can rewrite and put it into something that makes more sense and is more reflective of this day today and who I am today. And then start really living that narrative rather than the narrative that really we in a lot of ways inherited, or it's the first draft. Yeah. It's the first draft. And a lot of people walk around living the first draft their entire lives. But when we think about, and I don't think everybody needs to go to clinical therapy or, like have a therapist. I don't think that. That's why I do what I do on an educational, I think broadband is a better way of sharing this, because that's not, once you hear that, you can now do it. Find somebody who can help you write your narrative. And it doesn't have to be a clinical psychologist. It doesn't have to be, hopefully we're going to create trauma experts in just the general population. We want everybody to understand this. So then we help each other do it without it needing to be. So then we save the specialists for the really hard stuff.
Yeah. So I think what I hear you saying is a way to metabolize our story is to tell it, write it,
and refine it, right?
And
refine it. And edit it. Yeah. So whatever your medium is for telling your story is, you can tell it, you can write it, you can paint it, you can run it, you can do your story however you want to do your story that feels good. But editing it and refining it and fine-tuning it all the time is part of it.
Yeah. To follow up with that, I'm curious how, I'm sure there's lots of modalities or ways you'd engage this, but how do we uncover stories that we might be unaware of?
Ooh.
Like implicit memory
Yeah.
versus explicit.
So good. So good. This is my favorite topic, infant mental health, ghosts in the nursery. So ghosts, those are your ghosts that are in your brain because you don't have a concrete. So here's how this works. Pre-verbal memories. If you have an experience that's scary, painful, traumatic, sad, before you had the word painful, scary, sad, traumatic, you can't say, you really hurt my feelings. That made me sad. All you have in your body is that sense of, ache, of painful sadness in your body as a nonverbal implicit memory or fear. And this is the root of anxiety. And sometimes the root of depression, where anger is turned inward. A baby might visually see their parent being physically abused, but they're a baby. They don't have words for what's happening, but they're mad about it, sad about it, scared about it. All those feelings are in their body, but they have no words. So all they can do is grow up and reactivate that same story and do the same thing unless it gets disrupted. So what we need to do is to be able to help people find their historical story from people who know, grandparents, friends of the family, older siblings. I happen to have an older sibling who's 13 years older. So I use her as my historian sometimes to say, you know what? I feel like this happened. And, what was I like when I was 4? What was I, these are, I kind of have a sense of certain things, but she really can give me more information. And sure, it's through her perception, but it's better than my version. And so being our own historians and finding people who can be historians for us and help us to remember and understand what somebody was like or what the experience was like as a baby. I happen to be the parent of a child who came to me through adoption. He came to me at 4.5 years old. His name's Joe. He's yummy. I adore him. He's 33 now. And he could be a pill sometimes, but I met his biological father, and so did he. We met him together. Actually, I met him first. I picked him up and brought him to my house to meet Joe. When Joe was about maybe 18, 19, 17, 18, 19, something like that, an older teenager. And I got to sit with this man who I didn't know ever, I had no relationship with in any way, and he talked about my son, my boy, as an infant. And he told me stories, and he told Joe stories, because we were together, about how he was as a baby, which was boom, connecting these dots that I feel like was such a huge gift for me, because it really explained a piece of him that I missed. But it also was exactly who he was. I knew exactly this boy was a squirmy sleeper. He ate and his metabolism was on fire. He could have eaten every probably 3 hours and just burn it, So that's where getting historical information, I think for Joe, my son, it was so important too for him in grounding his experience, because he didn't leave that family. He left that family because of trauma. So he has an early birth, young baby story that I can help with to some degree, but I can't fill the pieces in because I wasn't there either.
I will say that I've inadvertently been able to do some healthy work because of my twin brother, who has memories of growing up and I don't. And I've asked him, what was just different experiences. What happened when I just have zero memory, and I've gotten to uncover a few things and to process it with him, and it's been really, really helpful. And so just how you said that, it's been so accurate for me, especially as I've read that avoidant attachment styles tend to not have much that they remember growing up. Yeah, I think that from my experience, that's been so accurate. Yeah.
And there are things too that are more involved, like doing hypnosis, walking yourself back with a safe and skillful therapist can be very powerful. And I'm going to tell you right up front, I was not a hypnosis believer. I'm like, oh, please, I could never be hypnotized. Okay. So hypnosis isn't like what you think of the thing that happened in high school where they run around with the chick, whatever. It's not that. And so finding somebody who's really skillful in, doing depth therapy, this is a whole different level of counseling, counseling there's a lot of different modalities of therapy, I know you guys know, but there are some that are just behavioral change difference kinds of things. But then there are places where you go really deep. And this is where we do deep work and we find out sort of our, where does our trauma get lodged in our body? And how do our body informs our mind and our mind informs our body? So, wow, I feel like, I hold a lot of things in my heart and in my voice, my throat, because it's where your voice is. Like, I need to say this. But that's, we can find those places in our bodies if we can work with somebody who knows how to do that in a safe way and a loving way. And I'm going to plug my own therapist, Dr. Ginger Swanson in Santa Barbara, because she has really helped me to get in touch with places that, and I've been doing this work for my whole adult life. And, when you find somebody who's really good, it's a gift. It really is.
Yeah.
So
I don't have a question, but just a comment that, I'm taking notes that are going to sit with me for quite a while. And I'm sure that that's true for our listeners too, that these concepts of shared conversations in appropriate ways, edit and refining your stories for coherence, and finding a historian to help you make sense, of your story. Those are really powerful, I think, things for us to all take with us and work on. So I'm just really thankful. So not a question, but just wanted to express gratitude for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have lots more questions, but I don't think
well, let's have have you back. Yeah.
Abram, you can always just call me and we can just have a conversation. It doesn't have to be on a podcast. You can just call me and say, hey, I want to know about this, because it's fine. I don't mind sharing information.
I have become entirely enamored with your expertise. So all of the things that make up what you do for a living. So
thank you. Yeah. I'm so flattered and appreciative of that. And so, I'm happy to share, and I want you to be able to take what I know from my experience of life, because I'm older, and combine it with your intellect of what you've learned to this point in life experience. And then, we just build it out. We just have to keep building it out, because that's how we're going to change things. So,
right. Yeah. Right. I will say one final thing, just some of the stuff I've connected, I guess, if in a sentence, is that you actually probably you don't have the capacity to tune emotionally into your children if you don't learn that capacity yourself, to tune into yourself, right?
I would say that none of us have the capacity to tune into anybody if we can't tune into ourselves some of the time. Okay? Because some of it's automatic, right? You know what? I can just tune into my partner without going through a really deep cognitive thinking process, like I need to do this, or tune into my granddaughter or anybody. I can tune into someone emotionally without a lot of work. But if we're going to really high level tune into somebody and have a deep conversation that's emotional or emotionally charged, yeah, it's important to be able to get your grounding in first. So we've got to get ourselves sensitive, grounded, listening, able to not be activated on instantaneously. That's what's important. But I want you all to leave knowing that even though this is complicated work, there is so much more to resilience and so much more positive that comes out of negative experiences than negative. Think about how many stories there are of triumph over trauma. There are a lot more stories like that than there are that end in just trauma. And so in some ways, probably this is why delusional optimism exists, good does overpower bad in a lot of ways. It takes less positive to squelch negative, especially if we time it right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's a perfect ending note. And I know, like, Dr. B, you and I always end a lot of these like early childhood development, parenting things of like it. What you're talking about, I'm sure it's like parents are overwhelmed with all this information. And when do I do this? And when do I? It's just show up and be the loving, compassionate parent, and you don't have to be perfect.
Exactly. Yes.
And you're gonna be okay. Totally. Just keep loving your kid as best as you know how.
Yeah. Right. And when you mess up, just say, you know what? Wow, I messed up, and I want to just talk to you about that, and model for them like how to recover from a mess up. No big deal. We all mess up.
Beautiful.
You know what? Just mess up, fix it, go back. It's so good. We don't have to be perfect for our children either.
Yeah.
Good.
That's why I really like the language of the framework of good enough parenting, which sounds like half-assed parenting, but it's not. It's just it's acceptance of the fact that you're not going to be perfect, but what you're doing, enough of it is incredibly valuable. Yeah.
So valuable. Yes. Yeah. Show up. Just show up. And then it's just better from there. It gets better from there, but show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. B, how can people find you, book you,
they
benefit
can
from your expertise?
Always jump on the podcast, Delusional Optimism with Dr. B and Seth Creekmore, or they can find me at my website, www.drbconnections.com. And pretty much there you can track me down on LinkedIn and all the other spots. Yeah. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I was going to ask you real quick, what was the name of those books that you were naming earlier that you can read with your kids?
So, and I'm going to plug, I am actually getting to write a book called A Kid's Book About Resilience in 2020. So I'm really excited about that. But let me show you. So we'll put Jelani's in. He's the book founder, and the company, he was on our podcast. So it's a kid's book about racism. This was the first one. Jelani Memory is the founder of the company. And now they've just changed the business from a kid's book about like a kid's book about for kids to a kid's company about. So there's lots of these. But yeah, it's
They also have a kids podcast about, which I've listened to a few episodes, and they do such a wonderful job.
Yes, they do. Such an awesome job. And they now have baby books.
Wow.
A little book about fear, a little book about family.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, but wait, here's my favorite. My two other favorites. Look at this. A kid's book about bravery.
Aww.
Wow.
And in case you want to keep them busy, a kid's book about activism. So these are getting sent to my my great nephews. So yeah. So babies, even, like starting that conversation with babies.
Thank you so much, Dr.
All right.
B.
Thanks, guys. So good. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Always. You have my phone number. So anytime, Abram, if you want to chat, just call me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you. If you're interested in booking a training, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at my website, Dr. B Connections. There's a big button that says, book a training with Dr. B. It's that easy. If this show has been beneficial for you, please share it with your friends and family. Spreading the word about the show helps us grow our audience and helps continue to change the world together. Again, thanks so much for listening to Delusional Optimism. Now, go leave a life print. All content on Delusional Optimism is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice and does not establish any kind of patient-client relationship. A patient-client relationship is only formed through a written contractual agreement. If you need medical or mental health care advice, you should consult your doctor or therapist or go to your nearest hospital.